the myths that grew up around what existed in Palestine in 1948. For me, one of the most enlightening things is this movie called The Great Book Robbery by Benny Bruner. I met Benny years ago in a different life, and that film was very sort of instrumental in sort of a very sort of like comfortable way to sort of come to the idea that, like, wait a second, this was not a question of just people just wandering through. There was, in fact, if not a sort of some type of federal government, there was a civilization that existed in 1948 in Palestine.
Yeah, definitely. The myth that the Zionist movement found a desert and bloomed it, that unfortunately was repeated by the president of the EU, is quite unacceptable today, with so much research available for us to show that this is nonsense. Palestine had a vibrant society, a very educated urban elite. A lot of people were living in the rural areas, but that was the situation in the world at large in the mid-19th century. It was cosmopolitical in many ways, especially on the coast. Jews, Muslims, and Christians shared neighborhoods and villages. There was a genuine coexistence, not the kind of more artificial coexistence. It was a genuine coexistence. It was organically connected to the rest of the Arab world, and therefore benefited from the cultural renaissance, which we call in Arabic the Nahda, the cultural renaissance in the Arab world in the 19th century. And it's interesting that you're mentioning books, because there was a very famous saying in the Middle East at the time of the beginning of the 20th century, that the good books are written in Egypt, are printed in Lebanon, and are being read in Jaffa or in Palestine. That was the sense, that the Palestinians were the educated people consuming of culture, by the way, not only Arab culture, but also Western culture. And the biggest tragedy of Palestine is that, especially after the Second World War, the Palestinian society took off in terms of modernization, education, wealth, and that was totally cut off 3 years later by the catastrophe. But what happened in 48 was a destruction of an organic society that was on the way to a different phase of modernization, a different phase of nationalization, and with a huge human capital that we know exists, because after 48, it contributed significantly to the development of educational system in Iraq, in Egypt, and to the financial systems of Lebanon, and to the government administration in Jordan. There was a human capital in Palestine that would have, to my mind, turned Palestine in one of the most important and inspiring countries in the Arab world, but this did not happen in 48.
And let's address the myth that these people that you're talking about, particularly the sort of, like, I guess, the brain drain of that specific area, or I guess the dispersal of that human capital, left voluntarily. This is also, I think, sort of part and parcel, of the myth. And again, like, I go back and forth as to, how much of this is really important to like, sort of looking at the situation today. But for so many, it seems to me that when you talk about today, they'll immediately go to 1973 or 1967 or 1948 and say, well, people left, or the Holocaust. And so these things have a resonance. So the idea that Palestinians just decided, well, we're just going to leave because leadership has said you should go. Tell us what the reality of that is.
Yes, also the reality, and why is it important today to know that reality? We now have quite a enough number of documents that were declassified by Israel, which, by the way, Israel reclassified lately, but never mind, were declassified in time in the late 1980s and early 1990s, and enough documents declassified by the United Nations, the United States, and Britain to give us a very accurate picture of why the Palestinians became refugees. And it's very, very clear that the Zionist leadership, and after that the Israeli leadership, systematically planned the mass expulsion of the Palestinians, what I called ethnic cleansing, because if you get rid of people because of their ethnicity in large number, the only way of describing it is ethnic cleansing. And this was done even before the 15th of May, before the end of the mandate, and before one Arab soldier entered Palestine, because one of the important element in the Israeli mythology of this is that the Arab world sent its troops into Palestine and told the Palestinians to leave, and that's why the Palestinians became refugees. Or in a more liberal Zionist version, what can you do if the Arab world comes to destroy the state of Israel? There is a collateral damage, namely Palestinian refugees. But not most, but half at least of the Palestinians who became refugees before the 15th of May, 1948. Most of the cities and towns of Palestine were ethnically cleansed in April 1948 as part of a Plan D, a master plan for the ethnic cleansing of Palestine that was ideological in the sense that if Israel is going to be a viable state as a Jewish democracy, it cannot tolerate a large number of Palestinians in that future state. Now, why is it important for today? What is important for today is not only the ethnic cleansing of 1948, far more important is the international reaction to that ethnic cleansing. There were American reporters on the ground, there were United Nations emissaries on the ground, the International Red Cross had its own people on the ground. People knew about the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. It was not a secret. You cannot kick out almost 1 million people and the world not knowing. But there was a conscious decision that Israel should be allowed to do it as a compensation for the Holocaust, for anti-Semitism, or as one American diplomat put it, in order to, we are allowing a small injustice in order to correct a much bigger injustice. Nobody thought it was just in America, among American policymakers who knew exactly what was going on the ground. The problem was that the message for Israel was that it can use ethnic cleansing, while maybe other democracies cannot use it, as means for strategizing. And that's why Israel continued the ethnic cleansing. Until 1967, it expelled 36 villages from inside Israel. During the 67 war, it expelled 300,000 Palestinians. Since 1967 until today, Israel expelled more than 500,000 Palestinians from the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And as just before the 7th of October, ethnic cleansing operations were taking place in East Jerusalem, the south of Hebron, and the Jordan Valley. So expelling Palestinians either in small numbers or in large numbers, as is being done now in the Gaza Strip, is part of what Israel thinks is a legitimate arsenal of maintaining the viability of a Jewish state. And the sense in Israel is that the international community, if not the civil society, governments accept it as an unnecessary evil for keeping Israel alive.
And that is, I think, so key, the context there and the systematic ethnic cleansing, and you see the map of Palestinian territory shrinking as those decades pass, to understanding the hollowness of the calls by someone like Biden, who I saw put out a tweet saying that we have to move towards a two-state solution. Can you talk a bit about how that's essentially such an unserious request at this point because of how much territory has been taken? In my opinion, the only real solution to ending this cycle of violence is a multiracial, multi-ethnic democracy where Palestinians are given full rights. I'm curious about your assessment of that path forward.
Yeah. First of all, Emma, I agree with you. I think that's the only way forward. not only because of the impracticality, and I will talk about it in a minute, of the two-state solution now with the new established facts on the ground, but also as a principle, as the best way forward for a country that has millions of a third generation of settlers, if you want, and millions of the indigenous people, many of them still millions refugees outside the country. The only way of reconciling these two communities is through a multiracial, multi-ethnic, democratic state that would be a win-win. It would be a win-win formula for everyone concerned. Now, more concretely, I agree. I mean, because the settler colonial movement has these two dimensions, geography and demography, or space and population, Israel always had this dilemma. It wanted more space, but with more space came more Palestinians. So what they decided in 1967, and I wrote about it in my book, The Biggest Prison on Earth, what they decided in 1967 is not to expel massively the Palestinians as they did in 1948, but to create this matrix of power that enclaves the Palestinians in such a way and does not allow them to expand, that actually you don't have demographically to calculate them in your democracy. So millions of Palestinians in Gaza and in the West Bank could not vote, could not be elected, could not take part in their future. Israel called that solution a two-state solution. Even the most feeble Palestinian leader like Abu Mazen could not accept it. And now, for all practical intents and purposes, 60% of the West Bank is already annexed to Israel in one way or another. To create in this bisected remaining 40% of the West Bank a Palestinian state that would signify an international recognition of the rights of the Palestinians for self-determination is a joke. Is a joke at best. And anyway, I don't think the Israelis would allow either a one-state or a two-state. So I don't think that's the big question. And America would not force Israel to have the two states. It would allow Israel to continue with the status quo. They may talk the talk, but they won't walk the walk, so to speak. And therefore, we have one state now, but it's an apartheid state. It's an oppressive state. And it will have to be dynamics from within that will change the regime rather than create another state. But this needs, of course, an international support and solidarity, as happened in apartheid South Africa.